Okay, so in the last little video, we've put our three images in, and we're going to create this uh, image button that'll have a static state, an overstate, and a press state. And we've arranged it into a little symbol, and we know what the difference between symbols in the main timeline are. So it's got a little embedded timeline. So what we need to do is to be able to now link these state changes to the actions. So something that happens with the mouse will trigger certain state changes in the timeline. And what we'll be doing is just to say, okay, on mouse over, go from frame 1 on the timeline. So we'll pause here. On mouse over, click forward 1 frame and pause. And then on mouse click forward another frame and then do something. And so what we need to be able to do is to pause the timeline and to put some keyframes in it to help us to do that. Now, to illustrate something that happens with hype, so if we make an animation like this, we just play that, you'll see we know how to do that. If we then preview that in the browser, we have no control over the timeline. So as soon as the site launches, the browser does something and it's into the timeline, and we can't control it. What we can do is to say, okay, when this site launches, pause. So here in the timeline at the top, you'll see timeline actions. And if we just look in that little actions drop down, a bit like you did with the buttons, you'll see we can pause the timeline. And so now if I launch the site, it'll hold on frame 1 and wait. Okay. And then similar to what we were doing last week, we can then say, okay, do something when I tell you. So here we've got a little button in here. Put a button in and say, okay, when this is clicked, continue timeline. And that way we can have some functionality and control of the timeline. So here, frame 1 pause, on click, carry on. And that's essentially what we'll be doing with our little image button. So we can go into here, and you can see what I've got here is just my image layers ready, and the timeline actions thing that we've just used, we can use in the same way. So here, when you see this little symbol appear in our timeline, don't do anything, wait, and then when we have a mouse over, roll forward and wait 1 frame. So again, roll it forward 1 frame and pause. Wait again. So here we're going to go to the end of the frame. Same sort of thing. When we're clicking, forward 1 frame and wait. So we'll have 3 pauses in here. Okay. So that's just saying on each event for the mouse, go forward 1 and wait. So that's all we're doing. Now to link these little sets of images to the actions, ordinarily we've just been putting a button in here and linking the actions to that, which works for text and graphic buttons. So the buttons are kind of preset and they'll have those static hover and press states in them. For the image buttons, we need to do it slightly differently. So if we go in here, and you can see I've just got a little rectangle layer here which I've put in. If I click on that and just show you what it is, all I've done is gone into the menu for elements, chosen a rectangle like this, brought it in, made it the size of my images, and then turned the opacity right down. And what this enables me to do is to have a single layer that will have my actions and control the timeline that sits above everything. So it's like a container, if you like, although the things aren't in it, it's just sitting on top. And then I've taken the opacity down to 0, so I can still see the things operating underneath, but my actions are linked to the thing that's on top. So I now have my rectangle ready to attach the actions to, my state changes with timeline action keyframes underneath. So what we then need to do is just go into the actions panel here, and with that rectangle selected, I'll just remove these quickly, just show you how I did that. So here we're going to have the first state is the overstate. So just go into here, look for mouse over, click on that. Here we want to remember it's default to pause, so we want to continue the timeline. And then we're going to have a press state. So on click or on mouse down, again you want to continue the timeline and that'll get you to pause. And then for the mouse out, so when we roll out, we want it to go back to the start, so go back to the beginning of the timeline. And so here on the mouse out, instead of doing continue, we want to go to start. Now an important thing to note is that continue is when you want to resume the timeline, so you want to carry on playing from where you are. Start timeline doesn't mean start playing again, it means go to the start of the timeline. So if I do a mouse out for that, you'll see I'm going back to frame 1. So here we have mouse over, continue timeline, so stop pausing, continue playing. The playhead then bumps into the next pause, at which point if I press, it'll continue playing, and then if I mouse out, it'll jump back to the beginning. So what you should get is a little loop. Okay, so at this point with the key press, once we press that, we'll get a state change. So once you let go, this will change and go somewhere else. And then on the mouse out, we're back to the beginning.